The first violent shake came without warning. One moment the plane was steady, gliding through the thin air above Texas, the hum of the engines filling the cabin with a dull reassurance. The next, it dropped sharply, as if the ground had yanked the aircraft down by invisible ropes. Gasps broke out. A coffee cup toppled, its contents splashing dark stains across a passenger's jeans. The overhead bins rattled like they were ready to burst. The seatbelt sign blinked red. The chime echoed, sharp and cold, but by then most people were already gripping their armrests. The recycled air smelled of burnt coffee and plastic. A baby wailed somewhere near the back, its cry swallowed by the deep groan of engines straining against turbulence. Rebecca, in seat 14C, pressed her forehead to the window. All she could see was a blur of grey cloud and the wing flexing too much for comfort. Her hands were shaking, though she tried to hide it. 2 rows up, Mark pulled his baseball cap low and muttered a prayer under his breath. The flight attendants, usually so polished and calm, moved quickly down the aisle with clipped voices and eyes that betrayed concern they couldn't fully mask. Another drop, a harder one. People shouted. A man cursed loudly, holding tight to his seat as if his grip could hold the plane together. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then steadied again. Every second stretched into something heavier, like time itself was pressing against everyone's chest. It wasn't just turbulence. That's what some thought at first, but the crew's tight expressions said otherwise. This wasn't the routine bumps of air passengers could brush off. This was different. The plane shook again, harder than before, the kind of jolt that made every person silently consider the distance to the ground. Rebecca closed her eyes and whispered, "Lord, please." She hadn't prayed in years, not since she was a teenager. But now the words came back, fragile and trembling, like they had been, waiting inside her all this time. The crew instructed everyone to stay seated, voices loud over the intercom. But still, the unease thickened. There was something in the air beyond fear, something people couldn't name yet, and it was only the beginning. If you've ever felt that grip in your chest, that sudden awareness of life's fragility at 30,000 feet, then you'll know what these passengers were living. This story will take you there, step by step, moment by moment. Stay with it. And if these kinds of human stories matter to you, subscribe and follow along, so you don't miss what happens when faith collides with fear in the sky. The rattling eased for a breath, but no one relaxed. Rebecca opened her eyes again, and for just a flicker of a second she thought she saw something in the aisle, a figure, standing still while the whole cabin shook. She blinked, and it was gone. Silence held her throat. She didn't tell anyone, not yet. The turbulence didn't let up. It came in, waves unpredictable and brutal, like the sky itself was trying to shake the plane apart. The fuselage moaned with each jolt, and the overhead lights cast shadows across pale faces. Conversations had shrunk to whispers, prayers, or silence. Captain Harris's voice came through the speakers, steady but tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing severe turbulence. Please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened. We're working with air traffic control to adjust our altitude." He paused, almost like he was catching his breath before adding, "We'll keep you updated." Rebecca clenched the thin fabric of her armrest until her knuckles turned white. Her seatmate, an older man named David, kept flipping open and closing a worn Bible he had carried in his lap since boarding. He muttered passages under his breath, words carried away by the noise of rattling bins. Rebecca glanced sideways at him, wanting to ask what he was reading, but the words stuck in her throat. A loud bang cracked. Through the cabin, just a luggage bin slamming back into place, but the sound drew a collective gasp. A young woman 3 rows back screamed before covering her mouth. Her boyfriend pulled her close, eyes darting everywhere as if searching for control in a place where none existed. The flight attendants had strapped themselves in by now, their faces taut. One of them, Erin, whispered to another, "This isn't normal turbulence. Not this low, not this sudden." Rebecca caught the words, though she pretended she hadn't. Another surge. The plane tipped hard to one side, then leveled, Passengers shouted, some swore, some prayed. Rebecca felt her stomach lurch and pressed her head against the seat, trying to ground herself in the smell of fabric and the thud of her heartbeat. Her mind replayed the image from earlier, a figure in the aisle, still, calm. For that split second, it had looked like a man, not the crew, not a passenger. She thought of telling David, the man with the Bible. But she kept silent. What if fear had played a trick on her? What if she sounded insane? The engines roared louder, straining against the air. The sound filled the cabin until it felt like it was inside everyone's chest. Rebecca squeezed her eyes shut. David whispered louder now, not to her, but to someone he clearly believed was listening. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? Rebecca swallowed hard. Her palms were sweating. She wasn't religious, but she knew desperation. Everyone on board knew it now, and through the noise, through the chaos, a strange quiet began to take root, not in the storm outside, but in the way people started turning inward, each of them waiting for something, hoping. The minutes dragged. No one knew what would happen next. Rebecca opened her eyes again, the hum of fear pressing close. She glanced toward the aisle. Empty. Just shadows from the flickering light. But her chest tightened anyway. The storm wasn't just outside the plane, it was building inside. The cabin had become a place of hushed voices and restless eyes. Each vibration in the walls carried its own warning. Every shudder of the plane left the passengers bracing for something worse. Rebecca rubbed her palms against her jeans, trying to dry the sweat. She wanted to ask the man beside her, David, about the passage he kept repeating, but the words felt heavy in her mouth. The moment she finally worked up the courage, the intercom clicked again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Harris's voice came through, lower now, edged with a weight he wasn't hiding. We've hit a pocket of unexpected severe turbulence. We're working with controllers in Houston to find a safer altitude. We need you to remain calm and seated. The word unexpected hung in the air. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking, that the pilots didn't sound entirely sure they could fix it. A child in the back cried out, "Mum, are we going to crash?" The mother hushed. Her quickly, but her own voice cracked. People turned in their seats, not to stare, but as if the child had given shape to the fear none of them could name aloud. The air in the cabin felt thicker, warmer. Someone near the middle rows opened a vent overhead, blasting recycled air that smelled faintly metallic. The sound only added to the noise of shaking seats and overhead rattles. David clutched his Bible harder, lips moving faster now. Rebecca caught a word this time. Jesus. The name was like a spark in her memory, though she hadn't used it in years outside of frustration or habit. 2 rows ahead, a young man with earbuds yanked them out and started muttering prayers of his own, crossing himself. His girlfriend tried to copy him, stumbling through the motions. Another passenger, an elderly woman with trembling hands, whispered the Lord's Prayer, her voice shaking with each line. It wasn't loud, but soon the prayers spread like whispers carried on the current of fear. Different voices, different tones, each one rising out of desperation. Rebecca sat frozen, torn between disbelief and the pull of something deep inside she thought she'd buried. The turbulence hit again, sharp and brutal. The whole cabin jolted, heads snapping forward, drink spilling across tray tables. The lights flickered once more, and for an instant, shadows moved across the aisle. Rebecca's chest tightened, the same flicker, the same impression as before. A figure, standing calm in the chaos. She blinked and looked again. Empty, just swaying passengers gripping their seats. David leaned close, his voice hoarse but steady. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Rebecca froze. She hadn't said a word. Before she could answer, the cabin dropped again, throwing stomachs into throats. Screams tore out now, uncontrolled, human. The plane shuddered violently as the crew's voices rang out. "Stay seated, seatbelts on." And still, somewhere in the roar, the name Jesus kept circling, rising like a thread of hope no turbulence could shake loose. Erin unbuckled long enough to check on a man who had pressed his call button and then gone still. She steadied herself on seat backs as the plane lurched. "Sir?" she asked. He nodded. He was okay, only thirsty. She handed him a water, fingers trembling on the plastic. The intercom clicked. First Officer Nguyen spoke. "We're deviating west to avoid a cell. Please remain seated. Flight attendants, expect continued severe turbulence." His voice was even, but Erin heard the strain. In 14C, Rebecca tried to slow her breathing. She focused on the engine sound, telling herself a steady roar meant the engines were fine. Her knees knocked the tray table. Beside her, David opened the Bible. "John," he said softly, "do not be afraid." Another slam. The nose dipped and clawed back up. The bin above them snapped, one latch hanging open. Erin moved toward it, but the plane shuddered hard enough to bite her tongue. She swallowed blood and kept going. A voice rose. From midway down the cabin, thin and shocked. "Do you see him?" Heads turned. A woman in a denim jacket stared into the aisle like she was seeing an answer. "He's right there," she breathed. "Just standing." Rebecca followed her gaze. Row 18, a patch of carpet where the drinks cart paused. Nothing. Shadows, light, the sway of the fuselage. No man. Yet her skin prickled the way it had before, as if a shape rested where there wasn't one. "Ma'am," Erin said gently, reaching her. "Keep your seatbelt." "John, okay, we're going to get through this." The woman nodded, but her eyes didn't move. "He's calm," she whispered, "like he's waiting." David leaned toward Rebecca. "You feel it too." His voice was careful, like he didn't want to scare it away. Rebecca swallowed. "I don't know what I'm feeling," Nguyen returned. "We're descending to a lower altitude. Expect 10 more minutes of rough air." A murmur ran through the cabin, relief and dread mixed together. The rows creaked like an old ship, and the warm electric smell pressed close. Across the aisle, Mark with the baseball cap lifted his head. "Look," he said. He pointed at the space where the denim woman stared. "I don't know what that is, but I feel steadier, like I can breathe." No one shouted amen. Still something shifted, so slight it might have been imagination. The pitch of the cabin dropped from panic to a low hum. People glanced at the aisle, then at one another, relieved to learn they weren't alone. Erin latched the bin and squeezed the woman's shoulder a second longer than protocol. "We've got you," she said, and meant it. Back at 14C, Rebecca kept her eyes on the aisle until her vision watered. She didn't see a face or light. She just sensed a presence the way you sense heat from an oven, invisible until it touches your skin. Another jolt rolled through the cabin, slower now. Rebecca gripped the armrests. "If you're there," she thought, not saying it out loud, "I'm listening." She wasn't sure to whom she spoke, but the words landed somewhere deep and held. The plane kept shaking. The prayers didn't stop. Captain Harris rang the seatbelt chime twice. Erin knew what that meant. Cross-check the cabin with her eyes from where she was buckled and keep people calm with presence more than words. The cart in the galley had been locked down, coffee sloshed in metal pots, turning the air bitter and warm. Somewhere near row 22, a phone recorded with its lens peeking over a headrest. "Folks," Harris came back on, "we're coordinating with Houston Center for a smoother altitude. We may divert if the line of weather continues building. Stay seated. Flight attendants, remain secured." His voice was steady, the kind of calm that has to be practiced when your instruments won't stop dancing. Rebecca felt every tremor in her bones. The turbulence had changed character, less sudden, more rolling, like the plane was riding the back of something alive. She glanced at David's Bible. He held it open to John, finger, pressed to a verse he didn't read out loud, as if keeping his place in more ways than one. "Did you see him?" a man whispered across the aisle. He wore a faded polo and the same fear as everyone else. The denim jacket woman nodded without turning. "Yes," she said, breath thin. "He wasn't moving, like the shaking wasn't for him." A teenager 2 rows back snorted. "It's just lighting," he said, voice too loud. His mother squeezed his wrist. "Be respectful," she whispered, as though volume could tempt fate. Mark pushed his cap back and leaned into the aisle. "I don't know about seeing," he said, "but I felt something when I looked there. Different from panic. Like when my old man held my shoulder at the funeral, and I finally took a full breath." He blinked hard and settled again, embarrassed by the honesty that had slipped out. The plane shuddered, cabin lights dimming and then returning to a flat glow. A baby cried, then hiccuped into stillness. Erin unclenched her jaw. She could feel her heartbeat in her tongue where she'd bitten it. She checked the latches above her again, all locked. From the cockpit, Nguyen radioed a request to descend. Weather radar showed a broken line of returns that looked manageable, and then not at all. He adjusted course 10 degrees. The autopilot clicked off for a moment. One chime, a high, clinical sound, and he flew by hand while the air went from rough to choppy to rough again. He thought of his wife's last text. Pick up milk. Small things like a handrail you grab on the way down the stairs. "Lord, help," someone near the back said, voice small but plain. Not performative, just human. It didn't start a chorus. It didn't need to. A few heads bowed, others stared at nothing. A woman wiped at her cheeks like she could erase what was happening by removing the evidence. Rebecca rubbed the heel of her hand into her sternum to ease the tightness. The aisle felt like a thin road in a storm, ordinary carpet, ordinary lighting, and still the pull of it. When she tried to picture a face standing there, her mind refused. She got only the idea of presence like heat coming from an oven before you open the door. She hated that it comforted her. David spoke without looking away from the page. "Sometimes faith is just choosing where to look," he said. "Even if your eyes don't land on anything you can prove." His tone carried no pressure, only weariness and hope sharing the same seat. A man behind them pressed the call button. Erin unbuckled, for 3 steps, enough to lean forward, knuckles on seat backs. "Sir?" He had panic in his eyes and a wedding band he kept spinning. "I think I'm having an attack," he said. "I can't get air." Erin measured her words with the rhythm of the plane. "You are getting air, look at me." She matched his breathing. "In through your nose, out slow." The plane rolled. She steadied herself and waited with him until his shoulders fell a fraction. He exhaled and whispered, "Thank you." She nodded once, retreated and buckled in again. The act of helping someone grounded her more than any announcement. Another voice, softer than the rest, floated forward. He was barefoot. People turned, some with annoyance, some with hunger. The speaker, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses, shrank under the attention. I might be wrong, it was a second, but I thought I saw feet. Bare." He flushed. "That doesn't make sense. Don't listen to me." No one laughed. The detail was absurd and ordinary at the same time. It lodged in Rebecca's mind like a pebble in a shoe. Harris returned. "We're looking at options for San Antonio or Dallas if conditions worsen. We still expect improvement in the next 10 minutes. He paused. "Thank you for your patience." He could not say more. Words have weight when the floor won't stay still. The aisle remained empty, yet it felt occupied by what people needed. Some needed a miracle and found a memory. Some needed a savior and found a steady breath. Some needed proof and found a question they could live with for at least 1 more minute. The shaking eased a notch. Several passengers glanced down the aisle in the same second, as if called. Rebecca did too. She did not see a figure. She felt her spine loosen anyway, a millimeter at a time. She pressed her palms together in the space between her knees, not quite praying, not quite resisting. Outside, the clouds kept their own counsel. Inside, the quiet gathered a little weight. The plane dipped again, this time, longer, the kind of drop that made stomachs rise into throats. Gasps rippled like a wave, some hands shooting out to grab strangers' arms. A metallic groan ran along the ceiling panels. Rebecca clutched the armrest. Her chest burned. For a heartbeat, she thought the descent wouldn't stop. But then the engines surged, clawing them level again. The noise filled every inch of the cabin, making conversation impossible until the rumble eased. David lifted his head, face pale but steady. "That wasn't..." The end, he said softly, though Rebecca wasn't sure if he meant the plane or something else. Captain Harris's voice followed, tight and rehearsed. We've descended to avoid the most severe turbulence. Conditions should improve shortly. We remain on course, but we're considering a diversion if necessary. Please stay seated. Should, Rebecca repeated under her breath. The word landed heavy. From the back, the woman in the denim jacket spoke again, her voice stronger this time. I don't care if... You believe me, he's walking the aisle now. He doesn't fall, he doesn't stumble. A murmur stirred. Some scoffed, others leaned to see. Erin unbuckled and crouched beside the woman. Ma'am, I need you calm. But the woman's eyes were locked forward, unblinking. Mark tipped his cap back, watching too. If she's crazy, I guess I'm crazy. I feel it too. The teenager rolled his eyes, but his mother whispered, Hush. The command carried a seriousness that silenced him. Rebecca's skin prickled. She tried not to look, but her eyes drifted anyway. The aisle looked empty, just narrow carpet and swaying lights. Yet she felt something, an invisible gravity pulling her gaze there, like standing near a hospital bed when someone exhales for the last time. You can't see the difference, but you know it's there. The turbulence rattled again, though not as violent. People clung to it as a sign of hope. It's lighter, one man said. It's easing. David finally spoke louder, his voice carrying in a way it hadn't before. Faith doesn't erase fear. It just means you're not alone in it. He hadn't raised his voice much, but the words traveled down the rows. Rebecca's throat tightened. She hated that she wanted to believe him. The lights flickered once more. This time Rebecca didn't just see shadows. She caught a shape, shoulders maybe, the sense of a man standing calm in the aisle while everything else shivered. Her breath stuck. She blinked hard, but the impression lingered, stamped on her, vision like the afterimage of staring at the sun. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But in her silence, she realized something had shifted inside her. The plane rocked less now, though it still carried the weight of danger. The storm hadn't ended. But in the cabin, fear was being braided with something else. Fragile, unsteady, but real. Rebecca closed her eyes and whispered so only she could hear. If you're here, stay. Lightning flickered outside the windows, sharp bursts that lit the cabin, like a strobe. For half a second at a time, faces froze in pale flashes, eyes wide, lips tight, hands gripping. The rain hammered against the fuselage like gravel thrown by the sky itself. Rebecca counted each flash. 1, 2, 3. The seconds between them felt longer than they were. Somewhere nearby, a man muttered numbers, timing thunder against light, a pointless comfort at 30,000 feet, but something for his mind to hold. The captain came back, voice steady, words clipped. Folks, we've entered the edge of a cell. We're adjusting course south. It will remain rough. Thank you for staying calm. But calm wasn't what filled the cabin. It was a raw, brittle quiet, the kind where a single scream could break it. Erin scanned her section. She saw tears, hands locked together, lips moving silently. A woman rocked her child in the middle rows, whispering lullabies that quivered with fear. The baby had stopped crying, too shocked to make a sound. Then the denim jacket woman spoke. Again. He's still here, right beside us. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Rebecca's breath caught. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't stop. The aisle stretched narrow and shaking, lit in flickers of lightning, empty, but not. David placed a hand on the Bible in his lap. Do you feel it? He asked her quietly. Yes, Rebecca admitted, her voice shaking. The words surprised her. Others began to speak too, scattered confessions. I felt it when the plane dropped. I thought I was losing it, but yes. It's like someone steady is standing here. Not everyone agreed. A man in a suit near the front barked, You're imagining things. There's nothing here but bad air and nerves. He shoved his call button, demanding answers the crew couldn't give. The turbulence cracked through the argument, rattling the overhead bins again. Something inside thudded, a heavy sound that made heads snap up. The suit man went quiet, gripping his armrest like everyone else. Rebecca pressed her eyes shut. Her mind reached for an anchor, anything steady. Her father's voice came back from years ago, praying at the dinner table. She had rolled her eyes then. Now the memory felt like oxygen. When she opened her eyes, she didn't see a face, but she felt a nearness that defied words. Calm in the chaos. Stillness in the storm. David whispered, "He walks with us in fire and water." The storm outside cracked again, louder. The plane jolted hard enough to make teeth clack. Passengers cried out. Erin grabbed the intercom, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Stay seated, belts tight." Rebecca held her breath. In the aisle, a trick of the light, or something else, seemed to lean forward, as though the turbulence had no claim on it. The storm pressed closer, but so did the silence inside. The captain's voice returned, threaded with static. "Houston Center is advising tops to our south and a broken line ahead. We're getting ride reports from traffic 20 miles east, still rough. We're requesting further descent and a turn south-southwest." The words were careful, clipped like stones laid in a path. Erin breathed through her nose, slow and even. The cabin had settled into a strange quiet, no longer panic, not yet peace. She checked the latches above her, checked faces, checked the galley brakes again. Everything that could be locked was locked. Everything that could be held was being held. Rebecca stared at the aisle until her eyes watered. The carpet pattern swam. If she stared long enough, shapes tried to form where none existed. She blinked, looked at the seat number placard, then the window. Grey. Sheets of it, with brief flashes of white, where lightning found a place to live for half a second. David turned a page he hadn't read. "I used to read this to my wife when the treatments made the nights long," he said, voice low. "Sometimes we just listen to the sound of the words, not the meaning, the sound." He glanced at the aisle, then back to the book. "That's what this feels like. Sound first, meaning later." A chime. The autopilot clicked off and on again. Nguyen hand flew for a stretch, feeling for smoother air like a mechanic feeling a bearing. He trimmed, re-engaged, adjusted the radar tilt, painted the nearest returns, and asked for 5 degrees right. He pictured the approach plates for San Antonio without deciding anything yet. The discipline was the comfort, procedures, checklists, call-outs. The human brain loves a list when the floor won't stop moving. "Sir," Erin said softly to the man with the spinning wedding band, "you're still breathing. Count with me." He did, and she did, and for 20 seconds the rhythm inside his chest mattered more than the storm carving at the windows. Across the aisle, Mark rubbed his thumb over the curved edge of his armrest. "When my dad was sick," he said to no one in particular, "the hospital hallway smelled like raincoats and coffee. I'd walk it and feel watched over, like someone taller was beside me." He shrugged at his own words, embarrassed. "Feels like that now, I don't have better language." The teenager muttered, "Mass hallucination," but he kept his voice small. His mother didn't correct him. She just squeezed his hand and kept her eyes on the aisle. The denim jacket woman lifted her chin. "He's not a trick," she said, soft but stubborn. "He's just here." She didn't point. She didn't insist. She talked like someone reporting a weather condition. "Wire-rim glasses, man." Cleared his throat. "Barefoot," he whispered again, then shook his head as if dismissing himself. "Forget I said that." Another roll swept the cabin, trough to crest. Overhead bins creaked in a long, low chorus. A pen dropped and rattled under seats. Someone's phone buzzed uselessly against a plastic armrest, searching for towers that didn't exist up here. Harris came back on. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're evaluating a diversion to San Antonio to get you on the ground sooner if conditions persist. We'll let you know as soon as we have a decision. Thank you for staying seated." The words steadied people more than the air did. A plan, even a tentative one, can be a handrail. Rebecca touched the side of her neck and felt the hammer of her pulse. She didn't see a face in the aisle. She saw absence that felt like presence, and it comforted her against her will. She wasn't proud of that. She didn't care. David finally read aloud, quiet and plain. "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." He didn't add who said it. He didn't need to. A few heads bowed, not in show, just to shelter the moment. Erin checked her watch, then the rose, then the watch again. Seconds stretched. The shaking eased, then returned. A man near the front apologized to no one for cursing earlier. A woman kissed the top of her sleeping child's hair and whispered something only they would ever know. The captain rang twice, another coded note to the crew. Erin exhaled. The cabin's tone shifted a shade. Lighter, as if someone had opened a window in a house you couldn't leave. People still stared, still braced, still feared, but under it, something held. Rebecca finally spoke into the hum of engines and breath. "If you're there," she said, not loud, not showy, "I'm not running." No one answered. The calm didn't flood in. It just deepened by a finger's width, like water added to a glass that was always meant to be fuller than it looked. Outside, the storm still owned the sky. Inside, a claim owned the aisle. The plane rode both. The cockpit smelled faintly of hot plastic and coffee gone bitter. Captain Harris tapped the radar screen with 2 fingers, then glanced at Nguyen. "San Antonio's closest with workable weather. Fuel margin looks good. Let's brief." Nguyen nodded, voice steady as he called up the approach plates. "ILS 13R, ATS last report ceiling 3,000, winds out of the south." He spoke the details like bricks stacked into a wall. "Procedure, always procedure." In the cabin, the intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, for safety we are diverting to San Antonio. Expect continued turbulence on descent. Thank you for your patience." The announcement brought no applause, no cheers, just a low murmur, some relief, some fear. People had wanted a plan, but the thought of dropping into more storm air shook them too. Rebecca pressed her palms together, knuckles white. She hadn't prayed in years, but her body moved as though it remembered. She whispered words, more longing than language. The denim jacket woman whispered again, louder this time. "He's walking forward. I swear he is." Her eyes shone, reflecting the cabin lights. Mark tilted his head toward her. "If he is, maybe that's why we're still in the air," he muttered. No one corrected him. The teenager finally snapped. "You're all delusional. There's no one here." But his voice cracked, betraying fear he couldn't hide. His mother hushed him with a fierce look, then folded his hand inside hers. David lifted his Bible again, reading low, steady. Rebecca caught fragments. "Peace, storm, be still." Each word cut through the groan of the fuselage. The plane jolted again, harder, pitching a bag loose from the bin. It slammed onto the aisle. Erin lunged, strapping herself free long enough to shove it under a seat, heart pounding as the aircraft swayed. She buckled back in, chest heaving, eyes darting. The man with wire-rimmed glasses whispered, "Bare feet don't slip. Not on shaking floors." It was absurd, but the words carried a strange kind of weight. Lightning split the window view. Rebecca caught her reflection in the glass, pale, trembling, eyes wide. Behind her reflection, just for a breath, she thought she saw the faint impression of a figure standing. Not clear, not whole, just there. Her chest tightened. She looked away quickly, but her heart hammered with something besides fear. Erin steadied her breathing, forcing calm into her posture. She knew passengers, studied her face more than the captain's voice. If she broke, the cabin broke. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs, grounding herself. David leaned closer to Rebecca. "Sometimes presence isn't about seeing. It's about not being able to deny it." She wanted to argue, to dismiss it as panic or imagination, but the words snagged something deep in her. The plane shook again, then leveled. A tense stillness followed, broken only by the hum of engines and the soft murmur of prayers. They were descending now. Every passenger knew it in their bodies, the subtle change in pressure, the shift in engine tone. The storm outside wasn't finished, and the ground wasn't close enough. Rebecca closed her eyes. She didn't know if anyone walked the aisle, but she knew this. She wasn't the same woman who had boarded hours earlier. Something was breaking inside her, and something else was forming in its place. The descent felt different. Not a fall, but a controlled slide through rough layers that slapped the fuselage in tired bursts. Lights held a worn yellow. Coffee and warm plastic hung in the air. Vents hissed over tight faces. San Antonio approach, Flight 671 descending 12,000 for 10, Harris said, voice level. Nguyen trimmed, steady on a world that wouldn't stay still. Outside, grey on grey. Erin scanned her rows. People met her eyes like that alone could hold the airplane together. The denim jacket woman gripped her buckle and stared at the aisle. Mark kept his cap in his lap, head bowed, listening to something inside him. Rebecca worked a breathing rhythm, 4 in, 2 hold, 6 out. David read low, more sound than meaning. Take courage. Do not be afraid. The words laid a thin floor under her feet. The plane shivered, then steadied. Flaps whined. 671, left heading 180, maintain 8,000, expect ILS 13 right. Harris read it back. Procedure stacked on procedure. Rebecca looked at the aisle and felt steadiness rise. No face, no light. Only a calm that returned when she stared down the thin road between seats. A long roll rattled the bins and set off seatbelt creaks. Erin pressed the intercom. Cabin crew secured. Passengers remained seated. She breathed like she'd taught the man with the wedding band. He nodded back. Panic moved a few inches away. Wire-rimmed glasses man studied the carpet. Bare feet still, he murmured, then added clearer. I don't need to be right. I just need to be held. Together 10 more minutes. A few nodded. 9,000? 8.5, Nguyen called, setting the localizer. Harris briefed the missed approach because discipline plans for the moment the ground refuses you. He pictured runway lights through rain, flare, roll, reverse, a long, slow exhale. Gear down. The thunk and whir traveled the cabin, proof the ground was more than a theory. A woman across from Rebecca began to cry. Rebecca passed a tissue. The woman squeezed her fingers, grateful for the small, ordinary kindness. Rebecca didn't speak to whatever might be in the aisle. She kept looking when fear spiked, the way you fix on a horizon when the sea turns your stomach. It didn't cure it. It gave her a direction. They crossed another band of rain. Light smeared. The cabin dimmed, brightened, then settled. Someone whispered the Lord's Prayer, 1 beat behind David. Erin checked latches, faces, and the felt sense she couldn't name, the way she checked brakes and bins. She looked down, the aisle, and steadied anyway. Localizer alive, Nguyen said. Glide slope captured. Engines changed pitch. The nose eased lower. The path sharpened through the storm. Rebecca closed her eyes, not to escape, but to agree. She pictured someone keeping pace with the plane, neither pulling nor pushing, just beside them, step for step, through the narrow aisle. The cabin stayed noisy, fans, rattles, a child's cry, but under it, a quiet gathered. They were on final. No one clapped. Everyone waited, held, by belts and hope, while the unseen runway drew its line toward them. Rain streaked the windows in crooked lines. The runway lights weren't visible yet, but everyone on board could feel the ground pulling closer. The descent pressed ears and hearts tight. 6,000, established on the localizer, Nguyen said, hands steady on the yoke. Harris glanced at the instruments, then out into the grey wall. No break yet, only cloud stacked on cloud. In the cabin, Rebecca dug her nails into her palms, forcing herself to stay still. Her stomach lurched with every shift in altitude. She whispered to herself, "You've made it this far, don't stop now." David leaned toward her. "We're almost through." His words didn't erase fear, but they gave it shape. 10 more minutes instead of forever. Another jolt shook the plane. Luggage rattled. Someone cried out, voice sharp and raw. The intercom buzzed alive. "Cabin crew, be seated for landing." Erin buckled in fast, scanning faces one last time. The denim, Jacket woman was whispering again. He's still walking. The words rippled like a current through nearby rows. Mark tilted his chin, eyes wet. Then let him walk us down, he said. Rebecca's throat tightened. She wanted to close her eyes, but something made her look. The aisle was lit by thin overhead lights, swaying shadows cutting across the carpet. Empty, and yet not. A calm pressed against her chest, as real as the belt across her waist. The teenager muttered, "This is just panic." But his voice shook. His mother squeezed his hand tighter. "It's okay to believe in something when the ground feels far away," she whispered. He didn't argue. Nguyen called out, "Glide slope alive." The plane shivered again. Rain hammered harder against the fuselage. Harris gripped the throttles, focused. Rebecca felt every second drag. She remembered the earlier drop, the helplessness of freefall. Now she clung to the possibility that they weren't as alone as they thought. Her lips moved without sound, an unfinished prayer that carried no poetry, only need. The wire-rimmed glasses man pressed his hands flat on his knees. "If he's here," he whispered, "then so am I." Erin heard him, her pulse racing. She didn't know what she believed, but she recognized the steadiness his words carried. She held it like rope in her hands. The cabin lights flickered once more, then steadied. Rebecca shut her eyes, heart pounding, certain of only one thing. When she opened them again, the ground would be nearer. The plane shook as it cut deeper into the descent, the sound of wind hammering louder against the fuselage. Rain splattered against windows in sheets, blurring the view into grey nothing. Passengers leaned into belts, eyes wide, breaths shallow. 3,000, gear down, flaps 25, Nguyen called. Harris confirmed, his voice clipped. The landing checklist rolled between them like a lifeline. Rebecca pressed her hands together so tight her knuckles burned. She stared at the aisle, unwilling to blink. The sense of presence hadn't left. In fact, it seemed stronger the lower they came. She didn't see a face, didn't hear a word, but the calm settled around her chest like a second seatbelt. David's Bible slid a little on his lap as the nose dipped. He caught it, then opened again, whispering words that steadied him more than the straps across his body. "Peace. Be still." The words weren't shouted, they were carried on breath. A few passengers leaned toward him, hearing enough to cling. To another hard bump dropped the cabin a few feet. A woman screamed, muffled by her hands. Mark clenched his cap.